Hello, Austin. I'd like to thank you for allowing me into your homes for this 26th edition of Esoteric Science Roundtable. The topic for this show is free energy. Excuse me. Much has been discussed about the concept of free energy or zero-point energy. Most people, when they hear the term free energy, have the response, "Show me." People want proof of this elusive technology, and more importantly, how can this energy be harnessed and put into practical everyday use, safely and inexpensively? Wanting to see a demonstration of the process in a device that can be used on a large scale by everyone is understandable. The long-promised revolution of free energy, changing our society overnight, as some hoped, has yet to materialize. Now, I don't intend this evening to offer a working model of any sort of free energy apparatus, or even to show you practical working diagrams from which to construct your own version. I want to emphasize this evening why this technology has not enjoyed mainstream popularity or been implemented as a beneficial tool for our world. Now, several great figures throughout recent history made the study and application of this energy for use by mankind their life's work. Now, there are and continue to be many working and experimenting in this field, and that's definitely even up to our present day. There are a lot of people that are experimenting with this so-called free energy, not with a lot of publicity though, unfortunately. Some of the pioneers I want to mention include Nikola Tesla, with whom many are likely familiar or at least recognize the name. Now, some may be familiar with some of the facts regarding the life and some of the discoveries of Nikola Tesla. He was able to find a way to draw from the Earth itself energy. He saw that there was a resonance related to the Earth, and that you could tap into that resonance and you could pull, for all intents and purposes, free energy from the planet itself, that it was constantly regenerating, and this is a good way to get electricity. He is well known for bringing AC current, and that is what we use in our homes these days, the alternate current. Initially, he was, what's his name? One of the great inventors, Thomas Edison, had gotten him to change his system of electricity because Thomas Edison was using direct current exclusively, and that was how he was trying to generate electricity and move electricity. Now, Tesla saw that to make this to work with what Edison was working with, the device that Edison had, to make what was already there more effective, that the only way to do that would be using the alternate current, and that electricity would be able to be pushed much further, and it would be much more efficient to use AC as opposed to DC in trying to get electricity out. And supposedly there had been a contract, and Edison had agreed to pay Tesla X amount of dollars for his, coming up with this way to turn the energy source into AC. And upon doing this, when he went to get payment, allegedly, supposedly, Edison said, hey, don't you understand our American sense of humor? That was merely a joke. And so supposedly he got burned in that instance. And we see many instances in the life of Nikola Tesla where he tried to bring this information out for the benefit of humanity. He never really tried to, for his own aggrandizement or for his own self-interest. He really was trying to help humanity. And that is the keynote that that these experimenters have in common, is that they are not trying to look out for something for themselves. They're trying to help humanity through their discoveries, through their understanding, and through their experimentation. And unfortunately, Nikola Tesla died practically penniless, and all of his, a good portion of his discoveries ended up being confiscated by our government and some of the other governments of the world. And so allegedly, supposedly, this technology that Tesla came out with is being implemented in our day and age in some of these covert programs, military and otherwise, that his discoveries were deemed that important that they were, gathered up and kept under tight wraps as far as military security and that sort of thing, as far as using these ideas and exploiting these ideas, not for, again, everyone and the use of mankind in general, but for the use of just a few, or for the use of a specific agenda, be it a military might or any other ways that in which this energy might be exploited, as opposed to being made to be beneficial for more people. Now, another name of another experimenter who was able to understand this energy that resonates from our planet itself and other globes for that matter too, and it exchanges through these globes. That basically is the study of astrology, the energy that exchanges between the celestial globes, and that also affects us, the inhabitants of these different globes as well. Now that energy, again, being studied by this group of scientists, these group of men had a very, very keen understanding of nature. They had a very, very solemn and earnest appreciation for nature that is very, very hard to come by these days. And part of this is due to the fact that we're brought up in cities, and so we don't get to go out and experience true nature untouched in the respect that these gentlemen did, you know, considering that they lived around the late 1800s to the early 1900s when they did the bulk of their experimenting and were recognized at that time. So we don't have the land accessible to us quite as much, and there are a few other things too, but again, the profound reverence that these gentlemen had for our planet and for the divine science of the way in which our planet works, essentially. They all had that in common, and Wilhelm Reich, again, somebody that has gained some notoriety in more recent history, and Jeff Contreras has done quite a bit of work trying to inform the public about the orgone energy, which is his term for this energy that's resonating from the planet itself. And he broke it down to its negative and positive aspects, the negative aspect being door and the positive aspect being ore, and these basically just being two polarities of the orgone energy. Just like magnetism is positive and negative, it has both polarities inherent in itself. Again, Jeff Contreras has done a lot of work in this area, and he's done practical work by building these so-called chembusters. And if anybody's taken the time to notice, since those chembusters went online here in the Central Texas area, Austin, right in this area, there's at least 7 that I'm aware of for sure that are here in effect. If you see a chemtrail being spewed out, 30 seconds later, it's going to be dissipated and it's going to be ineffective. And again, I'm going to have to give Jeff a lot of credit for his devices that he's put out and about in this area, because the timing is just too coincidental for it just to be that he put these devices up and all of a sudden the chemtrails would noticeably dissipate. They don't hang in the air like they used to, and if anybody's noticing that, they can see that the chemtrails have been largely negated in Austin due to, I'll have to give Jeff Contreras a lot of credit, you know, due to his efforts. So, hey, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your good work in that area. And then I really want to go in depth this evening and give a little expose on one gentleman in particular who really has not received hardly any of the amount of attention, but he is equally instrumental in the research being carried out in the rebirth of this science. And there's a gentleman named Viktor Schauberger who was born in June 30th, 1885, and subsequently passed away September 25th, 1958. His tragic story mirrors that of these like-minded but better-known experimenters. As you will see, those that try to bring out the mysteries hidden in nature for the benefit of the race find that in so dedicating themselves to the salvage of humanity, they often make many powerful enemies. Now, Viktor Schauberger called this energy resonating from the planet and he called this an source as far as his terminology for, again, what Wilhelm Reich would term orgone. And Tesla, I don't really know his specific terminology aside from resonance. That's what he would have termed this energy that, again, is just comes from the globe naturally, that we can tap into once we understand more about it and understand science, true science, divine science. Now, Viktor Schauberger was again born on 30th of June, 1885, in the parish of Ulrichsburg in Upper Austria. He was descended from a long line of foresters who had devoted their whole lives to the natural management and administration of the forest, a dedication mirrored in their family motto, Fides in Silvis Salentibus, faith in the silent forest. With this as his background, and much against his father's will, but with the support of his mother, at the age of 18, he flatly refused to follow in the footsteps of his two elder brothers and attend university. Having seen how it affected his brother's thinking, apart from his earnest desire to become a forester, the main reason for his refusal was he did not wish to have his natural way of thinking corrupted by people he considered totally alienated to nature. He did not want to be forced to see things through other jaundiced eyes, but through his own, for as he later wrote, the only possible outcome of the purely categorizing compartmentality thrust upon us at school is the loss of our creativity. People are losing their individuality, their ability to see things as they really are, and thereby their connection with nature. They are fast approaching a state of equilibrium impossible in nature, which must force them into a total economic collapse. For no stable system of equilibrium exists. Therefore, the principles upon which our actions are founded are invalid because they operate within parameters that do not exist. Our work is the embodiment of our will. The spiritual manifestation of this work is its effect. When such work is done properly, it brings happiness, but when carried out incorrectly, it assuredly brings misery. Now, taking his mother's advice and following his natural instincts, Viktor became a junior forest warden, spending the next few years often in areas of remote forest. There he was able to perceive movements of energy and natural phenomena in nature's own laboratory, because in Austria in the early part of the century, circa 1900 to 1915, there were large tracts of forest still untouched by human hand. After the 1914 to 1918 war, in which he was wounded, Viktor returned to forestry, eventually entering the employ of Prince Adolf zu Schaumburg-Lippe, the owner of a large hunting and forestry reserve and stallery. Now, again, this from his own words, Schauberger tells us, our work is the embodiment of our will. The spiritual manifestation of this work is its effect. Now, that's a pretty good little summary, a pretty good little brief description of esoteric science, of the idea that there is a spiritual cause to every physical plane manifestation, and that once we understand this causative activity, the cause that leads to the physical plane effect, then we can understand more of our nature, more of the way that the energy, again, of the globe, this so-called energy or orgone, whatever term you choose to use, that we can tap into that, as did the ancients far, far back into antiquity that made use of this very same energy. That there is a renaissance coming around that's going to revive this science, and it will be recognized as the powerful tool and the beneficial tool for humanity that it actually is, I think, in the very near future. So again, when he was out in the forest, he was able to study nature firsthand and derive his own assertions, his own understanding, aside from university, outside of books, but again, in nature's own laboratory, he was able to study and see how nature worked, and then thereby to develop his own understanding and his own principles. The Schauberger's principal preoccupation was directed towards the conservation of the forest and wild game, and even in earliest youth, my fondest desire was to understand nature, and through such understanding to come closer to the truth, a truth that I was unable to discover either at school or in church. In this quest, I was thus drawn time and time again up into the forest. I could sit for hours on end and watch the water flowing by without ever becoming tired or bored. At the time, I was still unaware that in water the greatest secret lay hidden. Nor did I know that water was a carrier of life, or the earth's source of what we call consciousness. Stream of consciousness, possibly? Without any preconceptions, I simply let my gaze fall on the water as it flowed past. It was only years later that I came to realize that running water attracts our consciousness like a magnet and draws a small part of it along in its wake. It is a force that can act so powerfully that one temporarily loses one's consciousness and involuntarily falls asleep. As time passed, I began to play a game with water's secret powers. I surrendered my so-called free consciousness and allowed the water to take possession of it for a while. Little by little, this game turned into a profoundly earnest endeavor because I realized that one could detach one's own consciousness from the body and attach it to that of the water. When my own consciousness was eventually returned to me, when the water's most deeply concealed psyche often revealed the most extraordinary things to me. As a result of this investigation, a researcher was born who could dispatch his consciousness on a voyage of discovery, as it were. In this way, I was able to experience things that had escaped other people's notice because they were unaware that a human being is able to send forth his free consciousness into those places the eyes cannot see. By practicing this blindfolded vision, I eventually developed a bond with mysterious nature, whose essential being I then slowly learned to perceive and understand. And so you see how this man, tucked away in the forest, derived on his own, by his own strength of will, by his own willpower, his own desire to truly know and apprehend nature. And that's where that earnest desire has to start. And that's when we find ourselves suddenly thrust into some new form of knowledge or understanding. It happens, we can see references to that time and time again, and maybe you can find a demonstration for that in your own life. When you make the willing choice, the conscious choice to follow something, to find something, to understand something, then means will make themselves available depending on, again, your will, the strength of your will, but the proper means will make themselves available to demonstrate whatever this concept is as a fact in one's life. And we can find evidence of that if we can trust ourselves. And this is why it allowed this particular gentleman to have a step up, I believe, on your average university-educated scientist. That he was, again, in nature's own laboratory, and so by virtue of that, he had the benefit of untainted observation. He didn't have somebody telling him, oh, it's going to be this way and that way and this way. He saw for himself, and he had understanding from his own method. And again, if some bordering definitely on the metaphysical as far as leaving one's consciousness, the consciousness leaving one's physical body and one gaining understanding, that is a very age-old concept, and the Eastern idea of meditation that's been very much adopted in the West goes hand in hand with that idea as well. And so we find somebody, again, that's from a scientific background using more of a metaphysical means in order to ascertain and gain greater understanding. And I think we're going to see a resurgence of science finding its way back to spirituality more so and more so. And that, again, was going to have a lot to do with the resurgence and the renaissance of a free energy system being implemented for our practical use in our day and age. Now, to further quote some of what Viktor Schauberger wrote, nature is not served by rigid laws, but by rhythmical, reciprocal processes. Nature uses none of the preconditions of the chemist or the physicist for the purpose of evolution. Nature excludes all fire on principle for purposes of growth. Therefore, all contemporary machines are unnatural and constructed according to false premises. Nature avails herself of the dynamic form of motion through which the biological prerequisite for the emergence of life is provided. Its purpose is to procreate higher conditions of matter out of the originally inferior raw materials, which affords the evolutionarily older or the numerically greater rising generation the possibility of a constant capacity to evolve, for without any growing and increasing reserves of energy, there would be no evolution or development. This results first and foremost in the collapse of the so-called law of conservation of energy, and in further consequence the law of gravity, and all other dogmatics lose any rational or practical basis. And so again, he was able, through his natural observation, to devise his own understanding of science, and he saw how our society was not constructive in many ways. When he talks about using fire for the purpose of our contemporary machines as being unnatural and constructed according to false premises, we do expend a tremendous amount of money, energy rather, and money for that matter too, through devices that we build up that are based on fire, if you will, whether it's internal combustion engine, thermonuclear explosion, what have you. This is what he means by fire for energy, and this is why he feels that this is anti-productive, unproductive, and against the natural flow. Again, the idea of the energy, or energy from water, fire from water. And Chris Athanas just recently re-aired or Access just recently re-aired a Chris Athanas reality expander header show about fire from water, cold fusion, and that's another aspect of this I'll get into momentarily, and that ties in to the science, again, of getting this unlimited amount of energy through water, through oxygen and hydrogen, the interrelation of these two elements, and how we can bring them together and pull them apart, and that exchange, how we're able to pull energy from that, is yet to really be exploited and used for the benefit of mankind. But that is the key to the understanding of this whole capacity, this capacity to use this so-called free energy, zero-point energy, cold fusion. There are any number of terms for it. Anti-gravity technology also is the same in essence. That all, is all being used more in a covert manner, more for the black ops programs of our government, more so than, again, for our benefit. Now, in Viktor's view, Western science and education generally left much to be desired. Our civilization suffered from a myopic compartmentalization of the mind, which prevented a detached overview, a synthesis of what was observed. And again, Schauberger says, today's science thinks too primitively. Indeed, it could be said that its thinking is an octave too low. It has still not ventured far enough into the realm of energy, and its attitude has maintained purely materialistic. For this reason, it is principally to blame for the state of affairs we are experiencing today. In all probability, this development was necessary, for how else should a misguided humanity receive the true interdependencies? And it's kind of ironic that he would say that, because he's basically, in essence, saying that, it's kind of fitting and proper that we have to go through this period of not understanding this energy to gain an understanding of it and an appreciation of it, and to be able to truly implement it. So I think he understands that his work was not in vain by virtue of that very statement. Without doubt, therefore, there is a definite intention to teach young people upside-down methods of working with which they have to mis-earn their daily bread. That is to say, instead of moving forwards, they go backwards, all the more rapidly in step with the improvements in contrary methods of motion. For only thus can today's teaching principles flourish. And so basically what he's getting at is that students, he was saying that the youth had to unlearn. So in other words, don't look at the physical plane effect, but think back to the causative origin. That is the whole key to Viktor Schauberger's ideology, his method of trying to understand the natural divine science that is observable if one can tune into it and grasp it. But it has to be grasped from, again, an origin, a cause, not from looking at a physical plane event and then trying to go that route. You have to start at the cause and then trace it down to a physical plane event, actuality. And that is the key, that method is the key to understanding, and that is basically the way esoteric science works as well. You want to understand the cause, the spiritual cause leading to physical plane manifestation. Now, in contrast to contemporary science, Viktor saw will and spirit as a principal causative forces of physical existence. Again, will or thought being an actual thing, thought being a creative application, a creative process. That is how energy is moved, through thought. On the largest scale, on the the divine scale, the universal scale, thought creates our manifest world, and on the individual level, our thought creates. And so as we choose to think, so we are, as the old axiom goes. From 1930 to 1933, Viktor Schauberger worked with systems for water regeneration and the production of high-quality drinking water, for which patents were applied in 1934. This rather cumbersome prototype was later followed by an egg-shaped device, which was much smaller and far more efficient. When tested to its extreme power, however, it developed such powerful internal suction that even mercury seals of extremely densely packed molecular structure were unable to withstand the enormous suction generated and leaked into the water undergoing treatment. Despite the fact that this leakage occurred only when extremely high vacuum effects were present, but which were absent under normal conditions of operation, the government argued through its consultant, Professor Deering, that the public could not be exposed to the hazard of mercury poisoning. Laying heavy emphasis on this, all further use of the machine for the regeneration and production of spring-quality water and super-distilled water was forbidden. Indeed, Viktor Schauberger's Indeed, Viktor Schauberger's machine had evidently offended somebody in high places, for it was confiscated and destroyed by Austrian police. And you find that being the case over and over again, that these devices that these experimenters build, just like Royal Reich and his microscope, and the device that he built to generate a particular frequency that would kill off disease at that level, at the bacterial level, and at the smallest possible levels that science doesn't generally concede that we're able to see down that far. But he had success with this experimentation, and he also died in poverty, and his ideas were confiscated. Luckily, some of them were held back and safely kept away by some of his engineers. And so we have that today. But that's how most of this technology comes down to us, except for in a few instances that it has made its way into the mainstream. But my hope really is that as more people become aware that this energy is a real, actual, occurring, natural process that we can tap into, then, again, education is the key. Once we understand it's there, we can understand that we can make practical use of it. We can actually tap this energy for practical use. And if more people understand that, then more people can stand up and make a demand for this type of energy. You know, all the hybrid technology and all the hydrogen this and all of the hybrid cars and that sort of thing, that's a step in the right direction, and there may be some of that can be commended, but ultimately that is the automobile industries holding back and doing everything they possibly can to give you a little something, but to still keep the process of fossil fuels and the idea of dependency on fossil fuel still alive and part of our lives and controlling us. They have to have us still dependent on the fossil fuels, and that's also a double-edged sword as far as the fossil fuels, because, excuse me, they keep us dependent, and that gives them further excuse to go to other areas and take over. It's in the instance of Afghanistan, perfect case in point. They had plans, certain oil companies had plans to put a pipeline through the Taliban regime, which was not going to go for that, wanted to keep them out. And so that ties in on a large scale if you want to look at the political aspects of it, and that's what I'm trying to cover today, is the political reasons why free energy is being held into wraps still and not being let out for the masses to use and make use of in practical everyday use, to heat water, to fuel and power an automobile, to power the electricity for a building, all these simple things, to clean water, all of these things that would be so beneficial to humanity if we could, tap this and bring it online on a large scale. But again, politics play in big time. We can't just all of a sudden change from our fossil fuel, and everybody's going to probably have to concede that. We're not going to be able to change overnight from the fossil fuel to some new form of energy because, again, the existing system of economics based on the fossil fuel system would suffer, and there would be maybe not necessarily collapse, but there would be severe turmoil economically as a result of if we were to cut out fossil fuels entirely out of our diet instantaneously and go to a freer system. Now, again, free energy, that may be a bit of a misnomer because, true, it is free for all intents and purposes. The knowledge of how to derive that energy and how to use that energy and harness it is not free. Certainly, that's something that we have to earn and relearn because it was available to us back in antiquity, and we only have to rediscover it. And I think that as we're passing out of the so-called Piscean age of devotion into an age of Aquarius, into a more all-inclusive age, that we're going to see that, again, these devices that are based on a spiritual concept, not against God, not the types of devices that we have that we waste so much time and energy building, these massive earth-moving machines and all of these things that are really obsolete. They're really useless when we can go to a much simpler form of using energy. And again, clean, and there's no bad after effects. The after effects would be either hydrogen or oxygen. That's not going to hurt anything whatsoever. That's perfectly good for our environment. So those are the byproducts of this using this fuel. And again, free energy being, or 0-point energy, just being that you put in X amount of energy and you get demonstrated a positive yield. You get more energy out than you're putting in. And And so that positive yield is the free energy, so-called. Excuse me. And so, that being the case, this energy, we can use it if people are aware of it, and that's the whole thing. But again, with the oil, still being hooked on oil, it's going to be difficult for us to be able to make use of it. But there are those that for their own gain at the expense and misery of countless millions are still trying to hoard this technology and this information. We see evidence over and over again of the suppression and subjugation of sacred information. Now, in 1989, the cold fusion experiments of Parsons and Fleishman were reported upon and quickly ridiculed. Peer-reviewed attempts to reproduce the supposed positive energy yield were inconclusive or indicative of error, some alleged quack science, or purposeful deception by Parsons and Fleishman to gain wealth and notoriety. However, there were some institutions that did corroborate and were able to substantiate the claims that they were making, and also able to, more importantly, demonstrate a positive yield, demonstrate free energy in effect. Now, two important ones: Stanford, maybe some of you have heard of Stanford University, and Texas A&M, right here in Central Texas. And a gentleman named Professor Bacchus at A&M was one of the gentlemen that continued, even though, you know, he stuck his neck out, and his peers and other academia and you know, the school officials really were not too keen on him saying, hey, I've been able to corroborate the Parsons and Fleishman experiments, and there's something real and substantial to this, and I'm going to keep working on it, and to, you know, fly in the face of the establishment and just to keep going. And I really have to commend Professor Bacchus. Supposedly he even was denied Professor Emeritus status at one point because of his firm conviction to following out these experiments. And you know, and that the folks, the powers that be, if you would, were not too keen on that, as we can see from that instance. Another gentleman, Eugene Maloff, MIT also was consigned to do some experimentations to see if they could corroborate. And their experimentation didn't show up anything that was positive. But a certain gentleman, Eugene Maloff, resigned in disgust from MIT after he felt positive results to back up the claims of Parsons and Fleishman were covered up, altered, and falsified. Excuse me. And he has a very popular periodical publication called Infinite Energy. And there are other magazines, too, that cover this, you know, at different degrees. One would be Nexus, which is not completely dedicated, but they've had for many years sections that they dedicate some space in their magazine to the idea of free energy, zero-point energy, cold fusion, anti-gravity devices. Another one would be Borderlands magazine, and that one's a little bit more scientific and a little bit more maybe long-headed. It wouldn't be for the mainstream public so much, but they're both important. Well, all of these publications are very important, and they just go to demonstrate that this energy is starting to see the light of day again. Even a few years ago, I saw an interview with James Patterson on Good Morning America. He was discussing his Patterson fuel cell, which is a small contraption that generates more energy that is put into it, or demonstrates a positive yield. Now, again, I did see that with my own eyes on Good Morning America. That was a number of years ago, probably about 5-6 years ago, and it looks like a little toilet paper roll for all intents and purposes, a little small contraption, and it could be used. He was trying to get it to maybe be used in a water heater and something, some kind of a device like that, to where it could have some practical application in the home. And again, that's the key, is that there really hasn't been much demonstration as to a practical application for this science that can be demonstrated, you know, for everyone to see and to make use of. Even in the aspect of a toy or something simple like that, to demonstrate it. And so that is what keeps people from grasping that this might be a real concept. It's ridiculed quite often, and again, the large-scale attack against Parsons and Fleishman in the late 80s, early 90s also served to say, hey, you know, this is quack science, you know, there's nothing real to this. Excuse me. And so it's had a bad public perception as a result of the media portrayal, although Parsons and Fleishman were hired very shortly afterwards by Toyota and were put up in a lab on the French Riviera to go out and continue these experiments. Now, some could argue as to, you know, why would that be? If this is such a junk science, why would Toyota be willing to take good money and time and, you know, even give these guys the time of day to try to carry on these experiments if they thought there was, you know, it was just a bunch of junk? But, you know, according to what I understand, they were put up for a time by Toyota, and they had a very nice lab set up supposedly somewhere along the French Riviera. And also, someone else that believes in the anti-gravity technology, whether you choose to or not, would be NASA. NASA just recently purchased a machine from an Ohio company, and I don't have the name of the specific name of the company, but I did read the article on the LA Times webpage that this Ohio company had provided NASA with this machine for around $600 million that basically, by virtue of anti-gravity, was able to reduce mass. And so that was very important for them to be able to reduce mass. If you're thinking about lifting a payload or something like that, you want to make it as light as possible, obviously. And so there are various applications for reducing mass in the space program applications. And so supposedly they did purchase this many $million-dollar item from an American company, which I guess is good, it's American made, at any rate. So, you know, there are folks that do believe in this technology whether you choose to or not. Now, this anti-gravity technology is the same concept as free energy propulsion systems used in our real space program, not the dog and pony show called NASA, using technology that was obsolete at its inception in the form of liquid fuel propulsion engines for space travel. The idea that Werner von Braun came up with, and he was part of the Operation Paperclip project that brought German scientists over to the United States to work on different scientific projects. He knew from the get-go that the liquid fuel rockets, the multi-stage, the Saturn rockets that he initially developed, were obsolete from the get-go. That he was using a very antiquated means to propel something from point A to point B. Meanwhile, we had the real space program going on where anti-gravity devices were being installed into flying discs for all intents and purposes, if you will. And that just goes to show, if you're aware of this aspect of the Black Ops projects, that a good deal of the UFOs that have been reported and seen are ours. There are UFOs, there are anti-gravity devices, and that is a means of propulsion. So all of this stuff that you hear about NASA, about, you know, sending probes here and sending probes there, we have had for 50 years, let's say at least, the capacity for far travel, far interstellar travel, and also ties into the bending of the time matrix as well. The human condition known as time, linear time, past, present, and future, it's strictly a human condition. It's strictly contingent upon being here on this planet, confined to this paradigm of three-dimensionality. The level of vibration that we exist at allows us to understand that. Once we get past that and understand the true nature of energy, as some humans have only just really started to rediscover, then we'll be able to make use of this energy, and we'll be able to understand the concept of time travel and a lot of things along these lines that are able to make use of this type of energy. And we can get past being stuck on the corporate tit, the welfare tit with the oil, and that's fossil fuel means of drawing energy. You know, certainly there are other alternative ways of getting energy that have been exploited to a certain degree, and that would be the hydroelectric, or using water to generate electricity in the sense of a dam or a water mill, that kind of concept, or in wind technology. Now, even these have not really been exploited nearly as much as they could be to really help us out. Excuse me. To be able to make better use of natural resources to fuel, again, a city, any number of things that we can use these methods to provide energy for our society. Now, again, thinking about fossil fuels. The byproducts of fossil fuels are putting us basically in a pickle as far as the types of emissions that are created as a result of burning fossil fuels, the radiation and the byproducts of the nuclear fission that is used primarily in our reactors. That is very antiquated as well. It's a backwards form of trying to tap into the energy of the atom, or again, as I spoke previously, tapping into, in the case of water, that unique bond between hydrogen and oxygen, how to exploit and extract the energy from that fusion or that unfusion, and the tremendous amount of energy that's available as a result of that process. It's there and it's available for us. It's just a matter of rediscovering it and repopularizing it. Again, the drawbacks to the fossil fuels are mainly the byproducts, and so many things too. The type of wear and tear of the moving parts, and again, a heat-based engine, whether it's thermonuclear or whether it's fossil fuel related internal combustion engine. Those moving parts move, with a lot of heat, and so they tend to wear quickly, and it's just not very efficient. The free energy device would be able to move and operate without that intense heat, and so it could be cooled and used much more effectively, much more efficiently. Now, as far as this idea of reaching the mainstream, some people, again, if they can't have some solid proof of it in their lives, as far as a useful, practical device that can be demonstrated, they're not going to be able to. They're not going to believe it. They're not going to want to take that stretch. I don't know if any of you folks took the time to watch Jeff Contreras' show last night, but he did a really good job on elaborating on what he calls the 7 veils of understanding. And that ties into this as well, that when you get to basically what he terms the 5th veil, you have a level of perception, a level of understanding that will allow you as an individual to grasp some of these concepts, and you can make use of them in your own daily lives. Now, certainly only a certain segment of the population is going to be able to grasp and understand and make use of this information. It all is depending on, again, your personal paradigm that you've chosen to make as your own in this lifetime. And the veil that he spoke of as the 5th veil more or less describes having an understanding of this type of technology, and that there are those groups that have amassed power, that have also amassed technology, and that are hoarding it, if you will, and using it for their benefit and not for the benefit of the many, and that they use it to keep us restrained, constrained, and to limit free will. That's what they mainly are able to do by keeping us unaware of the fact that energy is very, very abundant, generated from our planet, and that we can tap into it. The idea of, again, finishing up a little bit about Viktor Schauberger, towards the end of the war, well, actually, around Hitler's time, he was also encouraged to help use his skills for the Nazis. And there's well, first of all, in 1943, despite his incapacitating war wounds and 58 years of age, Viktor was declared fit for active duty and was inducted into the Waffen-SS very much under duress. He came under the control of Heinrich Himmler, who forced him into research to develop a secret new weapon provided with suitable accommodation at Schloss Schönbrunn, the nearby Mauthausen concentration camp. To supply the workforce of prison engineers, Viktor was threatened with his life if he did not comply with orders and carry out this research. And so, obviously, the Hitler regime thought that there was something in this energy, if you will, and they used people like Viktor Schauberger and put them up to this experimentation very much against their will. But Viktor Schauberger still had in mind, even while he was being forced to create these devices, that it would still be for the benefit of helping some people. And that was his hope, at the very least. And so, let's see, from a certain point of view, Viktor Schauberger could have been considered lucky at the end of the war, because together with his team of engineers, he had been moved by the SS to Liechtenstein in Upper Austria due to the bombing of Vienna, and therefore in May 1945 came under the jurisdiction of the American Forces of Occupation. In Liechtenstein, Viktor was placed in protective custody by the Americans for 9 months and quartered inside a doubly faced and guarded perimeter. This was done partly to glean information about his involuntary, though to him, useful wartime research into higher atomic energies at Mauthausen and Liechtenstein, and partly to prevent his abduction by the Russians. Confirmation of this can be found in a letter Viktor wrote to the German Minister of Defense, Franz Joseph Strauss, on the 28th of February 1956. Here he relates how the last device upon which he had been working had been seized only a few days after its successful flight excuse me, by American intelligence investigators, who appeared to be very well informed about it. Its most important component, on the other hand, which was forgotten in the haste to move to Liechtenstein, had been removed by the Russians from his Vienna apartment, and the apartment subsequently blown up. And so again, just like with Operation Paperclip, you find that these great scientists at the end of World War II, around 1945, were being divvied up by the victors. And certain of these scientists went to Russia in particular, and certain of them went to the States. And that's where you get this whole Cold War buildup. That's another dog and pony show that was created just to keep the political powers that be in control, and to keep us in fear and keep us in dissension and unrest. And so again, we find that Viktor Schauberger was taken under the American, taken basically not prisoner, but into custody, if you will, by the Americans. And so he was eventually brought into our country to carry out his experimentation here. And he was offered money by an American company to work for them. A guy named Karl Gersheimer was a gentleman that first approached him. Looks like I do have a couple of calls, so I'll go ahead and check with them, see what's going on this evening. Hello, caller.
Hello?
Hi, are you there? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Listen, I have this theory and all that you're a moron.
Well, I'm glad that you're at least watching the Moron Show. Thank you for taking the time to do that. So who's the bigger moron? Hello, caller, you're on there.
Hey.
How are you?
What's the damn deal, kinfolk?
All right, so I'm getting more of my the more thought-provoking calls this evening, I see. I want to go ahead and finish a little bit here about Viktor Schauberger and finish up the tragic story of him coming into the States. How, again, he was approached by Karl Gersheimer to work for a particular corporation, and they wanted to obviously use his devices. And he was ultimately brought to Texas, to Sherman, Texas. There was a gentleman named Harold W. Totten, and he was the proprietor of the Washington Iron Works Incorporated in Sherman, Texas. And he also was instrumental in trying to bring Schauberger here to the States and try to extract whatever information he could to try to exploit and make some commercial gains through this technology. Hello, caller.
It burns when they urinate, my urination.
I'm getting some really creative callers this evening. Okay, so again, Schauberger did agree initially to come to the States for just a 3-month period of time. He didn't want to stay any longer. He was in very bad health, and so he didn't really want to stay much longer than that. And you know, he was kind of being held over a barrel. You know, he was later in life. He was poverty-stricken for the most part, and his son was a physicist, and his son came to the States as well and tried to help to help interpret, to be a translator for his ideas, because Schauberger, Viktor Schauberger, was not really a scientist so much. He wasn't university trained, classically trained in that sense, and so his terminology was of his own making, and his understanding was so that he didn't have the classical understanding of the scientific terms to express. And he wasn't a technician, he wasn't an engineer, so he wasn't building these devices. He only understood the science behind it and how it could be used in a device. He didn't actually construct the devices. He had to find other technicians and engineers to construct these devices for him to implement his science. Hello, caller.
Hello, is this me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm really sorry. I just chimed in right now, and I'm not really on the subject, but I've been meaning to ask you this question for a long time, and I'm glad I got through. Could I go ahead and ask it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted your thoughts on the connection between Elrond Hubbard, John Parsons, and Aleister Crowley. I'm not sure if that's going to mean anything to you, or just a general comment on Crowley and magic also.
Sure, I'll go with that comment, and I do have a little bit of understanding about that. Basically what that boils down to, and that you're talking about Crowley and Elrond Hubbard. Well, Elrond Hubbard, obviously we know him as a founder of Scientology. He was commissioned, allegedly at some point in time, as a CIA or a Black Ops operative for our inner government to infiltrate some of the secret societies, if you will, some of those organizations that worked with ritual and ceremonial magic and worked with the power of the mind and will. And they worked with that ability in that process. And so Elrond Hubbard was one of the people that was able to infiltrate and become a member himself of one of these organizations. And so he was able to glean some understanding. And he, rather than go back to what he was doing previously, started Scientology based on these basic premises, or the basic premise from the ritual and ceremonial magic that Crowley used. Crowley, he also, his evolution has kind of been somewhat, vague and mysterious as well. Initially, he was kind of more a good guy, and some of his books were very uplifting and positive, and you could tell that it seemed like he was trying to help people. But then he gradually changed his philosophy and his idea of becoming the beast and being anti-Christian, anti-Christ, and being a sworn opponent of Christianity. It's a little bit difficult to go into all that to full depths, but he felt it was his duty to blow open the mind of the average person. And so he wasn't really anti-Christ or against God per se, but he was against the established dogma of religion. And so that was what his changing was. So basically, again, Elrond Hubbard was able to infiltrate some of the organizations. I don't know how intimately he was with Crowley per se, but he was able to infiltrate some legitimate organizations, glean some understanding, and derive Scientology. Now, Scientology is basically clearing past levels, basically getting past your compartmentalization of your own psyche and, I guess, getting in touch with your pure aspect of will. The only thing with Scientology is you have to have a little money in your pocket to clear. It costs X amount of dollars to clear, certain levels. And I don't know that much about Scientology, and hopefully, I'm not, if I am somewhat mistaken about it, that's my understanding, but hopefully I'm not throwing that in a completely negative light. But that's my understanding. You have to have money, and Elrond Hubbard has actively sought out the celebrities, people of status and stature, people with money, both because they're influential because of their status, if they're an actor or a musician or what have you, but also because they're more, they have more money. They have more money to contribute to the cause. So there is a tie-in there that I'm aware of. So hopefully that was able to give you some understanding, maybe hopefully more so than you had previously. Thanks for the call. Hello, caller.
Hi, I'm gay and I just want...
Well, you're probably watching the wrong show, buddy. I don't have any kind of homosexual stuff to offer you today. Let's see. Just to wrap up, I've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and finish what happened with Viktor Schauberger. Finally. Okay, it got to the point where he was offered some money. He was offered a $15,000 cash down payment. There was a consortium between a gentleman named Donner, a gentleman named Dodd, and the other guy I mentioned, Gersheimer, that were working to try to get him to go ahead and sign on the dotted line, if you will, so that they could make use of his information. And ultimately, they finally did. They finally were able to get him to sign. And he basically signed away all of his understanding, all of his rights to everything, and even any future discussions. He couldn't really carry on any future research as a result of that. You want to take another call quickly? Hello, you're on the air?
Yeah, have you ever considered public suicide?
Public suicide?
Yeah, on television.
Not really. Thanks for your call, though. I'm sure somebody would think about doing that. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so again, under some duress and somewhat under some coercion, Schauberger signed away the rights to all of his discoveries and any future studies along that area he gave up any rights to. And so he ended up getting back to Germany, and he basically ended up saying, you know, I no longer own my own mind. I don't even own my own thoughts. After all I've done, finally there is nothing left. I'm a man with no future. So you can see he was thoroughly demoralized, as were these other examples that I've talked about, Tesla, Wilhelm Reich. These gentlemen that tried to do their all for the benefit of humanity, but were basically slapped in the face. So leaving Frankfurt by train, a few hours later, they arrived in Linz on the 20th of September at about midnight. On the afternoon of the 25th of September, 1958, 5 days after arriving home in Linz, Viktor Schauberger, who throughout his whole life had fought so hard to heal the environment and improve the lot of humanity, died a broken man. And the last quote I want to end with from him is, "They called me deranged. The hope is that they are right. It is of no greater or lesser import for yet another fool to wander this earth. But if I am right and science is wrong, then may the Lord God have mercy on mankind." And so again, he did pass away in 1958, largely without ever having his contributions acknowledged. We'll try to get one quick call in very briefly. Go ahead, caller.
Okay, well, where would you think, I mean, it's ludicrous to think that the combustion engine at this point in time is our, you know, sole source of energy and transportation. What do you theorize is their reason for holding back our current technology?
Well, just briefly, okay, they're able to exploit us to keep us onto the oil tit and come up with umpteen reasons why we have to go maybe to this country and have a war, because we've got to have that oil. We're so dependent on it. So us being politically attached to fossil fuels, and also it boils down to empowerment. We will be empowered if we have free energy, because it is, for all intents and purposes, free. It's very inexpensive to create, and so it's being held back for that very reason. It's too cheap, too clean, and it cannot be exploited and manipulated in the same way that a fossil fuel can be. So that's the bottom line as far as that goes. So I would like to mention Callum Coates, who wrote the article that I borrowed a lot of this from Viktor Schauberger from. He wrote this article for Nexus magazine in, I guess, 1995, and he also wrote a book about Viktor Schauberger. Callum Coates eventually ended up meeting Walter Schauberger, the son of Viktor Schauberger, and apparently he has his own institute, Walter Schauberger does, which is called the Pythagoras-Kepler System Institute in Laufen, Austria, and he studies Viktor's archives. So there is an organization that's, through his son, Viktor's son, that's still keeping these ideas alive and still experimenting, thank goodness. And that's our hope, that this is going to come to light and be more prevalent in the future. Now, I would like to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I'd like to encourage everyone to stay tuned for Chris Athanas and the Reality Expander TV show. I'd like to remind everybody that tomorrow is a philosophical meeting at Opal Divines on 6th Street. We're going to be there around 7 o'clock, so everybody come down and check it out if you have a mind to. Please feel free. It's free. I'm not going to be here for the next 2 weeks, so